She thought she'd lost everything when her ex married someone else, but fate had other plans. A spilled cup of coffee leads her to a man who would change not just her career, but her heart forever. Laura Taylor stood outside St. George's Cathedral, the cold London wind biting her skin as she stared at the ivory invitation trembling in her hands. Her name wasn't on it, not really. It was addressed to Ms. Laura Taylor and guest, as though someone had meant to mock her. Inside that grand, echoing cathedral, Mason Anderson, the man she had once planned to marry, was saying I do to Pamela Johnson, the woman he had always called just a friend. The betrayal should have destroyed her. And for a moment, it nearly did. 3 weeks earlier, it had all started with a single scroll through Instagram. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning. Laura was sitting in her cozy flat in South Kensington, hair tied up, still in pajamas, sipping her first cup of coffee before logging into work. She was 28, working as a marketing coordinator for a modest firm. Not rich, not glamorous, but comfortable. Her phone buzzed with a notification. When she opened Instagram, her entire world shattered in a heartbeat. There, in crisp digital clarity, was Mason, in a sharp navy blue suit, standing beneath a floral archway. His smile was wider than she'd ever seen it. And beside him, radiant in white lace, was Pamela Johnson. The caption read, "Forever begins now ring #JustMarried #BestDayOfMyLife." Laura froze. At first, she thought it was a joke, a cruel prank, maybe a photo shoot. But as she scrolled through comments filled with congratulations and heart emojis, reality sank in. The wedding had taken place yesterday. Yesterday, while Laura had been working late on a client campaign, still believing Mason was taking some space, still believing they had a future. Her breath caught. The mug slipped from her hands and shattered against the kitchen floor. She didn't even flinch. Her heart was pounding too hard for her to feel anything but disbelief. She called Mason's number, blocked. She texted him, no response. She even drove to his apartment, barely remembering the route through the blur of tears. The flat was empty. His things were gone. Out of desperation, she knocked on his mother's door down the hall. When the older woman opened it, her expression was flat and cold. "He's happy now," she said simply. "Please leave him alone." Then she shut the door. Laura drove home in silence, her body shaking. When she entered her flat, her eyes fell on the wedding dress hanging in her closet, still wrapped in plastic, untouched. A haunting reminder of a life she had planned and lost. That night, she curled up on her bedroom floor, the sound of London traffic humming faintly outside. For years of her life had been erased with one Instagram post. Everything she'd given Mason, her loyalty, her trust, her belief, had been discarded like it meant nothing. And yet, across the street from St. George's Cathedral, on the day Mason said his vows to another, a man in a black car sat waiting. He had waited for this moment for 3 years. What would happen next would change Laura's life forever. The week after Mason's wedding was a blur. Laura went to work because she didn't know what else to do. She stared at her computer screen, pretending to care about marketing pitches and client meetings. But inside she felt hollow. Food had no taste. Sleep never came. Every corner of London reminded her of Mason. The cafes they'd visited, the river walks they'd shared, the dreams they'd built that now meant nothing. One gray morning, she stopped at a cafe near her office. She could barely form words as she ordered a cappuccino. When she turned to leave, she bumped directly into someone. The coffee cup slipped from her hands, splattering hot liquid across an expensive charcoal suit. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," she gasped, grabbing napkins in panic. The man she'd hit didn't move away. He just smiled calm, unbothered, and said softly, "It's all right. Are you okay?" He was tall, probably mid-30s, with striking blue eyes and an air of quiet control. His voice was smooth, grounded, kind. Something about his concern, the genuine kind, not the surface-level sympathy people offer, broke through her composure. Laura began to cry. Right there in the middle of the cafe, tears streamed down her cheeks. She tried to apologize, but the words tumbled out between sobs. "I'm sorry, I'm not usually like this, everything fell apart, and I don't even know how to." The man gestured gently to a corner table. "Come sit," he said. He bought her a fresh coffee, then sat across from her, silent but present. He didn't interrupt. He didn't pity her. He simply listened as she told him everything. the Instagram post, the betrayal, the heartbreak. When she finally fell silent, he reached into his coat pocket and handed her a card. Adrian Wilson, CEO, Wilson and Company. Enterprises. If you ever need anything, call me, he said. Laura tucked the card into her bag, thanked him, and left, convinced she'd never see him again. But 2 weeks later, an email arrived. Subject: Interview opportunity, Wilson and Company. She hadn't applied. The message invited her to interview for a senior marketing position with a salary 3 times her current one. Confused but desperate for change, she accepted. When she arrived at Wilson and Company's gleaming glass headquarters, her stomach twisted. And when Adrian Wilson himself walked into the conference room, everything inside her stopped. He remembered her immediately. "Miss Taylor," he said with a faint smile, "I told you we might meet again." He explained that he had reviewed her portfolio after their encounter and been impressed. "The position is yours if you want it," he said. Against every instinct that told her life doesn't give second chances, Laura said yes. Working at Wilson and Company transformed Laura's world. The office was bright, fast-paced, challenging, but in the best way. For the first time since Mason, she felt alive again. Adrian was professional, yet unfailingly kind. He never made her feel small. When she stayed late, dinner would appear on her desk with a note. "Don't forget to eat." When she struggled with a project, he offered quiet encouragement, never pressure. Rumors swirled in the office that Adrian was brilliant but emotionally distant, that no one ever got close to him. And yet, with Laura, something was different. His gaze lingered longer. His tone softened. One late evening, after a long day finalizing a campaign, Adrian appeared in her doorway holding 2 cups of coffee. "You look like you need this," he said. She smiled tiredly. "I'm starting to think coffee is how you communicate." He chuckled and sat opposite her. For a moment, they just sat in the warm glow of her desk lamp, silence stretching between them. Finally, Laura said what had been nagging her since the day of her interview. "Why did you really hire me, Adrian?" He hesitated. Then, with quiet honesty, he said, "Because I knew you before the cafe." Laura blinked. "What do you mean?" He told her everything. 3 years ago, they had met briefly at a charity gala. She had been there with Mason. Adrian had noticed her instantly, her warmth, her way of speaking to people like they mattered. They'd talked for 20 minutes about books and travel before Mason appeared, possessive and irritated, pulling her away mid-sentence. "I never forgot you," Adrian said softly. "I tried to move on, but I couldn't. I learned who you were, not to invade your privacy, but to make sure you were okay. I found out about Mason and Pamela months before the wedding. But if I'd told you, would you have believed me?" Laura's throat tightened. "You watched me fall apart and said nothing?" "I waited," Adrian replied gently, "because you had to see it for yourself. You needed to rescue yourself, not be rescued by anyone else, not even me." Laura's eyes filled with tears. She stood abruptly, overwhelmed. "I don't know if that's noble or cruel." "It's honest," he said quietly. She left the office without another word. Over the next few days, she couldn't stop thinking about him. About how different his silence was from Mason's lies. About how, for all his mystery, Adrian had never deceived her. For the first time in months, she began to understand what real care looked like, the kind that gives you space to find yourself. A week later, there was a knock at her door. When Laura opened it, Mason Anderson stood there, looking exhausted, regret etched across his face. His marriage to Pamela had already crumbled. She was, according to him, controlling and cold. He told Laura he'd made a terrible mistake, that he wanted her back, that they could rebuild what they'd lost. For a fleeting moment, her old instincts stirred. The familiar ache. The memories. Then she asked softly, "Did you ever actually love me, Mason?" He hesitated. "Of course I cared about you." She cut him off. "That's not what I asked." He couldn't say it. And in that silence, Laura finally saw the truth. Mason had loved what she did for him. Her loyalty, her patience, her ability to forgive. But he had never loved her. She took a steady breath. "You loved being adored. I loved you. There's a difference." He started to protest, but she opened the door wider. "Goodbye, Mason." When the door closed, the air felt lighter. The next morning, Laura returned to work. She walked into Adrian's office and said, "I owe you an apology. And a thank you," for seeing me when I couldn't see myself. He smiled faintly. Does this mean you're back? Yes, she said. But this time on my own terms. Months passed. Laura poured herself into her career, therapy, and new friendships. She rediscovered her laughter, her confidence, her joy. Adrian stayed quietly supportive, always near, never overstepping. 6 months later, at the company's annual gala, Laura arrived in a deep sapphire gown. The room fell silent for a moment when she entered, radiant, strong, self-assured. Across the room, Adrian couldn't take his eyes off her. She crossed to him and smiled. Ask me to dinner. His smile widened. Laura Taylor, will you have dinner with me? She laughed softly. Yes. I think I'm finally ready. A year later, at the same charity gala where they had first met, Adrian knelt beneath glittering lights and asked her to marry him. This time, Laura said yes to a man who had chosen her from the beginning, but had loved her enough to wait until she chose herself first. On their wedding day, as she walked down the aisle toward Adrian, she felt no bitterness for the past, only gratitude. Mason's betrayal hadn't destroyed her. It had freed her. It had led her exactly where she was meant to be. Sometimes the worst heartbreak is just life clearing the path for the greatest love. And Laura Taylor finally understood. Rejection isn't failure. It's protection in disguise. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like, share, and subscribe to Boundless Echoes for more interesting stories. We really appreciate your support. Comment where you are watching from, so we can give you a shout out. See you in our next video.